The Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I have come to the floor this evening with Senator Moran of Kansas to take a moment, as I did last night, and as our colleagues, Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Coons did earlier this evening, to emphasize the importance of including the Afghan Adjustment Act in either the end of the year spending bill or to pass on its own, but to get it done as soon as possible. Why? Well, more than 75,000 Afghans who sought refuge in our country are currently in limbo, including so many who risked their own lives and their own family safety to protect our service members. Why do we know this? Because nearly half of them have been vouched for by our own military. Because they come up to us at events with members of the U.S. military. And I know every member here have had this experience, where our own veterans, and I'm so pleased that Senator Moran, who is the ranking member on the Veterans Affairs Committee, has joined us on this bill after making some very important changes to the bill to make sure the vetting process was as thorough as possible. And we are also joined on this bill, by the way, by Senator Wicker, the incoming ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, by Senator Graham, who is the lead Republican with me, who is the lead Republican on this bill, longtime member of the military himself, by Senator Coons, who has been such a leader in foreign relations, by Senator Blumenthal, who also has a long history of working on veterans issues, by Senator Murkowski, who was an earlier supporter of this bill, by Senator Blunt, by Senator Shaheen, who has long led efforts and these issues in the Foreign Relations Committee, and by Senator Leahy. There are many other senators who are waiting to get on as co-sponsors of this bill, and there are many more than that who would vote to support it. Why? Well, after their sacrifice and after helping them to relocate in the United States, it is our responsibility to provide these Afghan refugees with the assurance that they can stay here and rebuild their lives. My colleagues, they are already here. They are living in towns and cities across this country, and they simply need to know their status. They are in limbo. It makes them very difficult to start lives in this country. Why am I involved in this issue? Well, one, like everyone else, I met some of these brave refugees who had stood with our military. One was an interpreter, another had worked on many other intelligence issues with them. And I also, from my home state, it's the second biggest population of Hmong refugees from way back after the Vietnam War. Vietnamese Hmong came to this country, started a new life. Now they are doctors, their kids and their grandkids and their great-grandkids are police officers, and with their sacrifice, they rebuilt their lives in the United States of America. This bill is about showing that our country is committed to standing with people who stood with us. That's why today we filed an amendment with Senators Graham, Coons, Moran, Blumenthal, supported by many others who I've mentioned, to include this important legislation in the end of the year spending bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it. To be clear, this legislation doesn't just make this process make sense, it also makes it more thorough. Our bill requires applicants to go through vetting that is just as rigorous as the vetting they would have gone through if they came to the U.S. during a regular refugee process, a standard that 8 former Trump and George W. Bush administration national security officials called the gold standard of vetting. The other co-sponsors have worked with our Republican colleagues, including Senator Moran, who is here on the floor today, to respond to every issue identified by the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security in their Inspector General's reports, which were very helpful for us in crafting this bill. Our updated bill requires the Department of Homeland Security and Defense to consult with Congress before setting the vetting requirements. It also directs the Department of State and other federal agencies to work together to come up with a strategy for future evacuations to make sure that we have plans in place to vet and relocate those allies who serve alongside our troops. This bill is supported by more than 40 organizations, including the VFW. The Veterans of Foreign War support this bill. They have their members on the Hill in their own humble ways lobbying for this bill. They're not paid lobbyists. They are veteran civilian lobbyists out there trying to help us. The American Legion supports this bill. Admirals Mike Mullen, William McRaven, James Styrides, and Generals Richard Myers, Joseph Dunford, and Stan McChrystal support this bill. I'm very, very focused on this bill because I think about people in other countries that stand with our soldiers. It happens all the time. If this is what we do when they come to our country and we don't have their backs, what message are we sending to people in the rest of the world who stand with our soldiers, who protect them, who provide security for their families, who are there to translate and to interpret for them, who become their friends and close confidants? What message do we send if we just allow them to be in this country in limbo with no certain status ahead? We know what they will become when they stay here and when they get their green card and they can work. They have shown their work ethic, and they will have kids and grandkids that will go on just as the Hmong and Vietnamese did to become those teachers and police officers and farmers and bakers and nurses and doctors and builders and inventors. We know what they will do. But not if we don't give them that chance, not if we don't have their backs like they had ours. I am so proud to be joined by Senator Moran here on the floor and of his work on behalf of our veterans, his work with Senator Tester on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Thank you.
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, thank you, and I thank the Congresswoman, excuse me, the Senator. I am headed to the House this evening, and I have served in the House. I join my colleague in efforts to see that this legislation, the Afghan Administration Act, is advanced, that it moves forward. The chaotic evacuation from Kabul stranded thousands of Afghan allies behind enemy lines. For 2 decades, countless Afghans stood by our service members and risked their lives and their families' lives to support our troops in Afghanistan. Veterans of Afghan war are calling for Congress to provide safety and certainty for their allies and friends who assisted them in battle. This includes Iraq and Afghanistan veterans of America, veterans of foreign wars, the American Legion, and many others. The Afghan Adjustment Act will keep our promise to those who risked their lives for America while also protecting our national security. A veteran from Kansas, Slade Deister from Leavenworth, stated the following in support of the bill, and I quote him: "This is a critical piece of legislation that supports our nation's veterans and warfighters by ensuring that we honor our allies during America's longest war. If Congress does not act to support its allies by passing the Afghan Adjustment Act, potential allies in future combat zones are going to be less likely to support the U.S. mission after seeing our Afghan partners abandoned." Mr. President, at the time in which the individuals, a number, were being evacuated, but many left behind, our offices, my staff and I, received over 1,000 inquiries from Kansas. Inquiries really isn't the right word. Pleas for help. Over 1,000 Kansans related to us the challenges that their friends, their supporters, their comrades faced as a result of being left behind in Afghanistan in those frightful 2, 3, 4 weeks in which so much uncertainty and our ability to evacuate was so lacking. Over 1,000 Kansans asked for my help, and while we were successful in some occasions, so many were left behind in such tragic circumstances and with such emotional appeals emotional results from those who wanted to make certain that those who helped save their lives, they helped save theirs. My hometown pastor's daughter was a missionary, she and her husband, in Afghanistan. Their plea to me was, please help get Christians out of Afghanistan because we know they will be murdered if left behind. We must answer these calls and establish a pathway for our Afghan partners to begin a new life in safety. We worked, and Senator Klobuchar mentioned this, we worked to ensure, before we sponsored this legislation, we worked to ensure, and we had tremendous help and cooperation from the original sponsors, but we wanted to ensure this legislation protects our national security. I was pleased to work with Senator Klobuchar and others to bolster the vetting process for newly arriving Afghans. The updates outline the specific requirements, including mandatory in-person interviews for all applicants and agency briefings to Congress on proposed vetting procedures prior to implementation of the vetting process. It also mandates the State Department develop a contingency plan for future emergency evacuations, including standard practices for screening and vetting foreign nationals to be relocated to the United States. Mr. President, I urge my colleagues, I thank my colleagues who are sponsors and advocates for this bill. I thank Senator Klobuchar for the invitation to join her on the Senate floor this evening. And I urge our colleagues to support this bipartisan effort to help those who helped us. Mr. President, I yield the floor.